It's one of the most sensational and sinister cases in Canadian history. To the outside world, they were the perfect power couple, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, a.k.a. Ken and Barbie. They were a well-respected couple, but behind their sparkling blue eyes lies no humanity in the slightest. Together they were a match made in hell, far more terrifying and psychotic than imaginable. Paul Bernardo was born in Ontario, Canada, in the district of Scarborough. He had a very difficult upbringing. His father Kenneth was very abusive to the family and even molested Paul's sister. During Paul's time at university, he developed dark sexual fantasies. Not only was he abusive and degrading towards his girlfriends, but he would force them to have anal sex with him and threaten to kill them if they ever speak out. Eventually, these women were granted restraining orders against Paul. Starting in May of 1987, the suburb of Scarborough in Ontario was plagued by a series of horrific crimes. In the early hours of the morning on the 4th of May 1987, a young woman getting off the bus was kidnapped and raped. Over the next week alone, there will be 2 more similar assaults reported. The victims were all women between the ages of 15 and 21. All the victims reported they were threatened to not go to the place. The similarities in what the women had suffered from led authorities to believe it was done by the same man. After this was made public, the newspapers quickly dubbed the man as a Scarborough rapist. A couple of Paul's victims managed to fight him off, and Paul was subsequently questioned by the police. But due to a lack of evidence, he was not named as an official suspect. Just a few months later, he would meet the love of his life, also partner in crime. This was Karla Homolka. She was born in Port Credit, Ontario. She had 2 younger sisters, Laurie and Tammy. Karla was a gifted, well-behaved student but fell into depression and regularly cut herself. She was an attention seeker who would do anything to attract the attention of others. Not only did she claim false suicide attempts, but later began taking on sadistic fantasies. When Karla was 17, she met 23-year-old Paul Bernardo at a restaurant in October 1987. The minute they locked eyes, they were instantly attracted to each other, describing it as love at first sight. Paul would drive to spend time with her twice a week. Eventually, he would come to control her life. He controlled her daily activities, what she ate, how she dressed, and her beliefs. Karla would do anything to impress him. She thoroughly submitted herself to him and his dark sexual behaviors. But this wasn't enough for Paul, and he wanted her to improve. So he would write down his comments on what they called a self-improvement list. Despite being in a relationship with Karla, this didn't stop Paul from going on a crime spree. In March of 1988, the police recognized there was a rapist, so started a task force to apprehend the infamous Scarborough rapist. There were heavy amounts of evidence and a composite sketch of the potential rapist, but the police failed to show this to the public and the case remained cold. Karla was in fact aware of Paul's crime spree, and there's been allegations to suggest she was involved in some of them. One victim said when they were being attacked, Karla was seen to be recording the ordeal, but this was ignored by the police. In 1990, the police decided to release the composite sketch to the public. Friends and previous girlfriends of Paul were quick to contact the police, but unfortunately this was not followed up. A few months later, in November, the police took blood, saliva and hair samples from Paul Bernardo as part of a citywide investigation. Luck was on Paul's side because these wouldn't be tested for another 2 years. Paul started to develop an obsession with Karla's 15-year-old sister Tammy. He stalked her, and in 1990 he came up with a plan to rape her. But what was even more shocking is that Karla assisted him in doing so, and she would make sure Tammy remained a virgin until then. Paul attempted to rape her after Karla drugged her sister's dinner with Valium. But Tammy woke up before Paul had the chance to. The second attempt happened in Homolka's family's home just a couple of days before Christmas, on the 23rd of December 1990. While Karla's parents slept, they spiked Tammy's drink with sleeping pills, and once she was unconscious, Paul raped her, while Karla held a halothane-soaked cloth to Tammy's face. To make matters worse, the couple filmed the entire act. Tammy began to vomit and stopped breathing. They tried to revive her, but failed, so they quickly cleaned the room to remove any evidence, dressed Tammy, and then carried her back to her room before calling the ambulance. Tammy's death was ruled accidental, despite having a large chemical burn on her face. After Tammy's death, Paul and Karla moved to Port Dalhousie. Here they disgracefully reenacted themselves role-playing sexual acts between Paul and Tammy. Karla played her sister and wore her clothing to make the fantasy more realistic, and this was also filmed. Karla invited her colleague to their home in June 1991. Her name remains unknown as she was referred as Jane Doe during the trial. Karla then handed her a drink which had been spiked. This caused her to lose consciousness. She then told Paul she had a surprise gift for him and the two filmed themselves raping her. The victim woke up the next day not knowing she had been raped, but just that she felt very unwell. A few days later, on the 15th of June, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey asked Paul for a cigarette. Paul saw this as an opportunity, so asked her to follow him to his car. Here, he blindfolded her, forced her inside the house and told Karla of their new playmate. They filmed themselves raping her, but when Leslie's blindfold fell off during the act, they killed her to stop her from going to the place. She was then dismembered and they disposed her remains in Lake Gibson. Her body was discovered on the 29th of June, 1991, the same day as Paul and Karla's wedding. In August 1991, Karla's colleague Jane Doe was invited over once again. What happened next was very similar to what had happened to Tammy. During the rape, she stopped breathing but luckily was revived. Karla actually called the emergency service and requested for an ambulance, but when she was revived, Karla called them back and the ambulance was recalled. On the 16th of April 1992, Paul and Karla kidnapped 15-year-old Kristen French, who was leaving school. Karla was the one to lure Kristen into their car.
So I said, well, if we see a girl, we're gonna stop. I'm gonna ask her for directions. I'm gonna try and get her over to the car. So he wanted her right beside him so he could hold the knife to her. And I sat in the back seat, actually more in the middle of the two of the front seats, and I held her hair and I held her head down.
Kristen, however, was not blindfolded and forced to drink large amounts of alcohol and to watch Leslie's rape tape. The couple raped her for 3 days, then once they were bored they strangled her to death with an electrical cord. They tried to remove the evidence on her body by cleaning and cutting her hair off. They then disposed her body.
Her feet were tied with that electrical cord that he used to kill Leslie. And there was electrical cord around her neck. He anally raped her and then he strangled her after he was done. It stands out really clear in my mind because the night before I left him, he did the exact same thing to me, only he didn't kill me.
Through further investigation, the police connected Paul with the murder, so interviewed him, but somehow came to the conclusion that he was an unlikely suspect despite his previous connections with the Scarborough rapes. In December 1992, Paul was hitting Karla with a flashlight, and this left her with multiple bruises all over her body and 2 badly beaten, swollen black eyes. Regardless of her injuries, she returned to work on the 4th of January 1993, and when questioned about her bruises, she said it's from a traffic accident. Her colleagues didn't believe her and contacted her parents, who subsequently took her to the hospital. Karla then opened up to the doctors, claiming her husband Paul did it, and filed charges against him, in which he was immediately arrested.
He had beaten me really badly, and my whole face was black and blue.
Because of this, the samples Paul had given 2 years earlier were finally tested. On the 1st of February 1993, the Toronto Metro Police found Paul's DNA matches that of the Scarborough rapist. After that, everything unravelled, and soon Paul and Karla would find themselves facing the legal consequences for their heinous crimes. In February 1993, Karla sought immunity for information in the case, but this was denied. Instead, she was given 1 week to accept a 12-year sentence for manslaughter or face charges for all 3 murders. Karla accepted the plea deal and testified against Paul at his trial, which took place in 1995. During Karla's interrogation, she told the police Paul had bragged to her about raping at least 30 women. This was double the amount of assaults police suspected he had committed. And she also described him as the happy rapist.
Those burns are possibly chemical in nature and antemortem.
The only chemical that was near her was the halothane. It was not placed on her face directly. It was held, as I said, like this far away.
This is not true, because the videotape of the assault they filmed showed Karla holding the soaked cloth very close to Tammy's face, nearly suffocating her, and not as distant as she claimed. She then goes on to explain how upset she was after being emotionally attached with her victims.
I never should have gotten to know Kristen, because you get emotionally involved with these people, and it really hurts. It hurts a lot more, because I felt like I was friends with both of them, especially Kristen, because we did so much stuff together. We put makeup on together. We talked, just girl talk when Paul was gone getting us food, and it just made it hurt even more. We're supposed to go to my parents for Easter dinner, and we don't go. And I said, well, how's it going to look if, this girl's missing and we have no alibi? Because he wanted to keep her for longer. And I didn't want to. I was going to work. I didn't want to go to work knowing that this girl was in my house and she could escape so easily. And I was afraid. So I didn't suggest to him that we kill her on Sunday. I knew that she had to be gone.
If it does hurt Karla as much as she claimed, there were multiple ways she could have helped save them. But she did none of that and even participated in the kidnapping of Kristen. She also implied they needed to kill her because she voiced how much she didn't want to leave Kristen in the house alone. Karla was brought back to one of the rooms in which Leslie was raped and murdered, but she was more bothered about the state of her furnitures.
Can you answer a question for me? Was any of the furniture damaged as a result of the investigation?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, good, so I'm asking for.
They then headed to the basement of where Christian was dismembered, but she didn't show any signs of remorse or sadness. In fact, made a bizarre request.
Can I ask you a question?
I'm afraid I can't answer.
Can I have that book? My sister wants it. Or does that have to stay here?
That has to stay for now,
Okay.
but we can make those arrangements.
Okay, thank you.
Here she talks about the reason for killing them.
First of all, he killed Leslie because she could identify him. Okay, the reason why he started bringing him home was because he wasn't satisfied with just raping them and leaving. He wanted to have it over and over and over again.
During Paul's interrogation with the police, he was more concerned about being called a liar by the public than the heinous crimes he committed.
They can bring in all the facts to show just where I lied then, if I'm a liar. That's what I say to do, because either I'm a liar or I'm not a liar, and I'm not a liar. But you guys are trying to paint me as one. The public, according to the public, they turned on the TV in September of last year, and I was this crazy liar. That's what the TV reported, and not only did they report it there, they wrote it on my file. That's just awful. I mean, come on. Okay. Enough manipulation.
On the 1st of September 1995, he was convicted of a number of offences, to include 2 first-degree murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, along with 2 aggravated sexual assaults. Paul Bernardo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 25 years. As for Karla's plea deal, she had been offered before the content of the videotapes were made available for review. Some prosecutors said, had they known what was in those tapes, they would have never proposed to her the plea deal. But the plea deal was necessary because in spring of 1993, it was clear the case against Paul depended on Karla's evidence. Karla served just 12 years in prison and was released in 2005 after being denied parole. She moved to Guadeloupe and married her lawyer's brother, Thierry Bordelais, who she had 3 children with. She later moved back to Canada, where the family settled in Montreal. Karla occasionally volunteers at Montreal Elementary School, but parents oppose to this as well as her presence outside the school gates.
Can I talk to you for a second?
No, you can't.
We don't want her there. We don't want her in the school. How would you feel knowing that your child is interacting with a person who's a serial killer? It's not right.
I find Karla Homolka to be a very selfish person in volunteering in a school. Knowing she's some sort of public figure, I'm sure she must be aware of the backlash that she would get from other parents. Not only is this distressing for them, but her presence is hindering the normal development of all the children concerned. Thank you so much for watching. Please do let me know what your thoughts are on this case. I hope I earned myself a subscription and a recommendation. Click here to watch another video and please do stay safe out there and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.